So today we'll cover something on Workday reporting related to learning. Okay, we'll see what kind of data sources are there related to learning and how do we extract data from that. Okay. So I'll just quickly walk through on the steps that we have done for creating campaign. So if there is a audience that you have already created, you can just pick from the list of audiences that you have created for that specific custom report. If there is no audience where your custom report is not part of that audience, so you need to create that one. Okay. So
Right.
so what I was telling you is whenever you create an audience for campaign or whenever you're creating a report that needs to be attached to alert, make sure that your report is sitting in worker business object. Okay.
Mm.
Your report is sitting in worker business object and not there are multiple data sources, multiple business objects that return the same worker information. Let's say now the report that I've created, which is opening, is sitting in worker business object and the data source type is of standard, and you can see all the worker information that I'm pulling. The same information can be returned in multiple ways with multiple data sources. Let's say employee is one of the business object. Employee will be pulling the same information. Okay, hire date, employee day, manager, all these things will be also sitting in can be also pulled from employee business object, because employee is a subset of worker business object. Worker is nothing but employee only, so worker and employee are both are subsets. You can also return whatever information that you are returning from worker business object. You can also do that from employee. But for any other reporting, that will be fine, no issues. But when you are actually creating campaigns, when you're actually creating alerts that you wanted to attach your custom report to those, your employee business object will not work. So worker is the only primary business object which will work for any kind of business case when you're considering your report should be attached to those campaign or alerts or custom reports, anything that you wanted to consider. Make sure that your report is sitting in worker business object. That is the first consideration that you will be making. And the second is standard. Yeah, data source type is standard. Basically, there are two types of data sources. One is standard, the other one is indexed. Okay, indexed data source are obviously used, to filter large volumes of data. Here you can see standard data source. Here you don't have any other filtering option because it does not have that option. But when you select your indexed type data source, you'll be having a lot of other filtering options within the business object, built-in filters, I can say. Okay, so indexed data source will have additional feature to built-in to filter large volumes of data within the data source. Let's say, for example, okay, worker is one of the business object. So let's say if worker is a kind of indexed data source type, and when you select indexed data source type within worker, there are a lot of other filtering options that you'll be getting. You wanted to return retirees, you wanted to return terminations, you wanted to return active, you wanted to return terminations. So all these kind of built-in filters, you'll be getting in indexed data source. But whereas in standard data source, you'll be not getting. You need to use this option to filter your data. But with indexed data source, within the data source itself, we will be having a lot of filtering options to filter huge amount of data. So that is the difference between standard data source and indexed data source. So whenever you are actually creating a report that needs to be attached for campaigns or alerts, make sure that your data source is type is standard and your primary business object is worker. So these are the two considerations that you need to make whenever you're creating a report that needs to be attached to either campaign or alert. Business object is a table. Okay, table which consists of all the information. Data source is a view of your business object. Okay, example for business object is worker. Okay, example for data source is terminated workers. Okay, worker business object will be holding all the information of worker. It could be retirees, it could be terminations, it could be active, it could be people who are on leave, anything, worker, your object will be holding a kind of umbrella, I can say, which will be holding all the information of a particular data. But whereas the data source is a view of your business object, your choice. If you wanted to select your data source as active employees, you can choose. If you wanted to select your data source as terminations, you can choose. If you wanted to select your data source as retirees, you can choose. But all these three terminations, active, retirees, all will be from business object called worker. Okay, so worker is a
Mm-hmm.
business object is a kind of table. In in Workday, every data that you create in Workday is a kind of object model, which is nothing but a kind of business object, which will be stored in business object. Let's say you're creating a you're hiring an employee. Okay, so once you hire an employee, where this data should go? Okay, when you're hiring an employee is nothing but a worker, right? Once you hire an employee into Workday, that data will be going into worker business object. Okay, and from worker business object, if you wanted to return any data related to different scenarios. Let's say you've been asked to, hey, you've been asked, hey, can you create a report for me, that returns all the retirees? That should not include active employees. That should not include terminations. That should not include people who are on leave. I wanted to have only employees who has got retired. Okay, then in that scenario, what you'll do? So there are multiple ways to achieve this thing. Okay, let me show example how we can. When you're creating custom report itself, you have an option to choose which data source that you wanted to have. The example that I said, if you wanted to return only retirees, okay, business object should be worker. Okay, data source under worker, You have a lot of things. Retirees. Okay, so now example I've selected retirees. So where this retire is coming from? This is coming from worker only, no? So data source is nothing but a view of your business object. How you wanted to view the data from the business object is the data source that is making the difference actually. If you wanted to view if you wanted to view active employees, you pick that active employees data source. If you wanted to pick only terminated employees, you pick terminated. If you wanted to return only retirees, you will pick retiree data source. So data source is nothing but it's a view of your business object, what you wanted to view the data from the business object after running the report. That is where you make a choice of selecting the data source. Now if you wanted to, let's say, worker is a primary business object, which I'm saying. Okay, so now there are multiple things that you can do with worker. Okay, so let's say you have been asked to return only retiree employees, that should not include any other. So what you'll do, you'll choose that particular data source. So I've chosen
Mm-hmm.
a data source called all retirees. Okay, so this data source is sitting on worker business object only. Okay, you can see here the data source is sitting in worker business object only. So when you actually go into report definition page, you see the business object is worker. Okay, data source is a view of your business object. Okay, there is a different child table, parent child table is different, but data source is different. Okay, so you're seeing worker, you also have an option to select a different sources. No, you can see here, if you go to the list of sources, you have a lot of different sources that you can choose from your business object. So data source is nothing but a data that you wanted to view from your business object, where you choose the data source. Okay, worker is a kind of data, so business object that I said, right? In worker you have multiple sources. If you wanted to, I said, right, if you wanted to return only all retirees, only if you wanted to return data of retirees, retire is nothing but an employee, right? Employee got terminated with a termination reason as retiree. So retiree will be sitting in worker business object, and all workers, irrespective of status, retirees terminations leave active, irrespective of the status. If you wanted to return or report worker data with all the status, you'll go for all worker data source. If you wanted to return only for pre-hires, okay, so employee who has whose profile has got created and who are in pre-hire status and going in recruitment process, if you wanted to return them, you will be actually selecting this particular data source called rehires. Okay, so if you wanted to return only terminations, there is a different data source. So in worker there are multiple data sources which will be returning employees of that particular category. Okay, so data source is not a kind of child table. Data source is a view of your business object. Is how that makes to view the data sitting in your business object. There's a different concept called parent table and child table. In reporting, that is
Mm-hmm.
different, but the data source is nothing but whenever you're creating a report, you are telling the report that I wanted to view the data of this category. So you will be selecting that particular data source. If you wanted to return employees who are on leave, if you wanted to return employees who got terminated, you'll be selecting that respective data source that will return you uh, that data who are terminated or who are active or who are terminated, who are leave, who are retirees. All this status, you'll be actually selecting at data source level. So that is one
Mm-hmm.
option. So whatever I'm saying is selecting at data source level is one object. But let's say if you have selected all workers as your data source, which will be returning all terminations, all retirees, all active employees, people who are on leave, everything, all workers in the sense, irrespective of the status, it will be returning every employee that is there in the system. So now if you wanted to filter for terminated, if you wanted to filter for retirees, if you wanted to filter for people who are on leave, if you wanted to filter only for active employees, so that is something, in different way you can do that filtering in report level. Okay, the first thing is at data source level, you have a choice to select the data source that you wanted to have. Whatever data that you're looking for, you have a choice of filtering the data at data source level. But if you wanted to go with kind of super data source where it will be having all the status, you also have an option at report level. You can go for filtering. You have selected all workers now. Okay, now you have also have an option to actually select status. If you wanted to actually return active employees, you go for active status. Okay, you'll be selecting this one. If you wanted to return only terminated, so you'll be selecting this one. If you wanted to return on leave, people who went on leave, you'll be selecting. So at report level also, you have an option to filter your data. Okay. So probably the number of reports that you create, that will be, you'll be gaining that experience to understand how to filter large volumes of data in terms of reporting. But yeah, conceptually, just understand that your data source, index data source, will be having built-in filters. But standard data source, whatever, and I'm filtering the data, you have to filter that. But indexed data source, you have an option. Let's say if I pick any of the indexed data source, I'll show you that example as well. So how you select indexed data source? So now you can note the difference. Now I've selected the data source, which is under a primary business object called worker, where the data source type is standard. I do not have any kind of filtering options at data source level. Now if I go for data source at data source of indexed category, I'll be able to do filtering at data source level. Now in order to select that one, so whenever you wanted to select indexed data source, okay, so the only thing that you need to do is you need to check this checkbox. Okay, if you're unchecking this checkbox, it means that you wanted to have standard data source. If you're checking this checkbox, you wanted to have data source of indexed. Okay, that is the difference that you need to know. Now I'm actually picking up indexed data source, which will be having filtering options at data source level. Standard data source will not have built-in filtering options, but you see here, indexed data source, you have filtering options at source level. You have an option to filter at data source level, which is a kind of feature that you have with indexed data source. This feature you'll not be having in standard data source. Okay, because this is of indexed data source, you have an option to filter your data within the data source because it consists of built-in prompts. So what we have done for standard data source, we have gone here and we have written a kind of filter conditions. But for indexed data source, you also have an option to actually filter the data at source level. Okay, so if you wanted to filter terminated, if you wanted to filter only employees, active employees, or in a different category by role, worker for all organizations, you have multiple filtering criteria within indexed data source, which you do not find in standard data source. So indexed data source have feature of filtering large volumes of data within the source level, but standard data source does not have. You need to filter that at report level. There is only difference between two. And Workday recommends to use indexed data source for complex reporting, huge data requirements. Workday recommends to use indexed data source type because it has filtering options within the report rather than you write a hard-coded filter in report when you are actually building a huge data returning report types. Recommended data sources indexed data source type with which will avoid any kind of performance issues when you're running a custom report that is returning huge amount of data. So index data source has feature of filtering huge volumes of data at source level. The standard data
Mm.
source, you have an option to filter at report level. When you're actually creating report, you have an option of all active employees. Okay, you can go for that data source also, but that will not be sitting in worker business object. That will be sitting in employee business object. Okay, you have an option to go with that also. It's completely depends upon your hands-on experience, how you're creating a report. Let's say you have been asked, hey, can you get me who are active during this particular period of time, let's say from 2018 to 2020. Get me the report that will that has all the information of active employees. Now it depends upon your thinking, it depends upon your experience, what data source that you'll be choosing. As you said, at starting level only, you have an option to select all active employees and you can filter the data within date range. But if you are going with all workers data source or all active terminated data source, or the other report that I was showing in index, right? You can go with this also. So with this report type also you can go. But the only thing is you need to do is filtering at report level, that active status is yes, and higher date between this date range you'll be selecting. So it depends upon your hands-on, it depends upon your thinking, how you wanted to create your report. All
No,
workers,
I got
all
it.
active employees, you have an option to select at source level, and also you have an option to filter at report level. Workday has given a number of business objects, hundreds of business objects, hundreds of data source. It depends upon your knowledge and your thinking, how you wanted to build your report. If you wanted to have your report without any kind of filtering conditions, at source level you will be picking that particular source called all active employees, data source that you will be selecting, and you'll be actually creating a report on that. Let's say worker is the other primary reason I can say, but probably it depends when you get complete hands-on and reporting, you'll be able to understand this. And you're telling that you're saying that prime parent and child, right? That will be coming here. Okay, let's say if you're using a worker as a primary business object, and if you wanted to return all the benefits that worker is getting. Okay, so benefits is nothing but different concept, different object. So benefits
Mm.
will be sitting in benefits business object. Okay, benefits. So how employee will be getting benefits? They need to enroll into particular benefit plan, and they need to opt the particular benefit plan and eligibility date. All these things will be considering. Depends upon the plan that is being issued for you. Okay, if you're asked to return, can get me all the employees who are enrolled in that particular benefit plan. Okay, for example. Okay, what you will
Mm.
do? So if you go with all active employees, that doesn't make sense, right? What your requirement is, you wanted to return employees who are enrolled into that particular benefit plan. So there are certain cases, probably you will be understanding, when you
Mm.
create multiple reports, there is a concept called parent-child relationship between reports. Parent table and child table. In Workday, we call it as primary business object and related business object. A related business object is the child of parent business object. Okay, so when you are actually creating a report with primary business object called worker, and when you are actually adding the secondary business object called related business object, which is returning benefits of that employee, which means that you're joining the table, you're joining the business object, you're actually clubbing the data to return that one. So worker is a primary business object, which is a parent for almost all the business object that is sitting in Workday. But all active employees, which I said, right, that will be sitting in employee business object, which will not work as a kind of parent and child relationship between the business object that sits in Workday. Worker is the only business object that will be associated, that will be linked to any other module that is sitting in Workday. Okay, let's say if you
Mm.
wanted to return learning enrollments. Okay, learning
Mm.
enrollments you wanted to return. Okay, now worker is the only primary business object that will link with learning enrollments. But employee, there is other object. I said employee, right? Employee will not be linking with learning enrollments. Worker is the primary business object, a kind of super object, I can say. Okay, a top powerful business object that will be linking with any other business object in Workday, which can be considered as a parent table. Worker is a kind of parent object, and related business object what you link. Learning enrollments you are linking. Okay, learning enrollments will be becoming related business object, which is a kind of child table. Okay, and benefit elections. Okay, benefit elections you wanted to return all the benefit elections that employee has made. Okay, benefit elections is a related business object of worker. Okay, you'll be able to make your choice, depends upon your business requirement, how you wanted to return the data. But remember, in any scenario in Workday reporting, worker is the mostly used business object in any module. Okay, any module. If you have been asked, let's say, if you've been asked, can you get me the list of open job requisitions or job requisitions, a list of job requisitions for which employee has got tied up, if you've been asked, okay, what you'll do? So no need of looking for any kind of different scenario. If your report requirement is to return worker information, worker is a primary business object. Okay, so you can give worker as a primary business object, child table as a job requisition, or child table as a learning enrollment, or child table as a benefit elections, anything. So your primary
Mm.
business object is worker, and your related can be anything that you wanted to have, that you wanted to
Okay.
link to your primary business object. So whenever conceptually understand, whenever you have been asked to create a report, okay, the first consideration that your report should be sitting in worker business object, which will be linking to all other business object that sits in Workday. But there are n number of business object, n number of data source. But once you get some hands-on experience, you'll be able to choose yourself, you'll be able to decide yourself what would be the business object of my report, what would be the source, what would be the child table of my report. You'll be able to identify, you'll be able to understand yourself. The more you create report, the more understanding you'll be getting, this whatever concept that I was trying to explain, you'll be able to relate that one. Let's say tomorrow you have been asked, hey, can you get me employees, a list of employees and all their dependent information? Okay, what you'll do? What you'll do?
Mm.
So you'll be actually creating your report in worker business object, and you'll be choosing dependent as a child table, child object, and will be returning a dependent information under worker. So your worker will be relating to your dependent secondary business object. So worker is a primary business object, and dependent is a child business object. If you're going for data source, that is not coming under worker. That only said, you said, if you wanted at source level, if we wanted to select all active employees rather than at report level filtering, why can't we do at source level? You can do, but your source, your depends upon your source, your object will change actually. Okay, so the basic thing that you need to know here is which sources will be coming on which business object. That is one thing that you need to understand. So for that, there are multiple standard reports in Workday. Okay, all data
Mm-hmm.
sources is one thing that you have. This is a
Okay.
standard report which will return you all the data sources sitting in or under that particular business object. So that will give you enough information of choosing which data source under which business object. Let's say I'll filter with the primary business object as worker. Okay. So you see, when I filtered with the worker business object, you see a lot of data sources associated with worker. Okay. So with which you can actually play around in your reporting. So you can see contingent worker and benefit thing, retirees, whatever I was trying to explain. your primary business object will be holding all this. But let's say if you wanted to, other than worker, which will be pulling worker information, let's say employee.
Hmm.
Employee is also worker, but both are subset to each other. Okay, you have the same sources. Okay, if you wanted to return active employees, okay, you'll be choosing at source level, and you'll be, when you choose all active employees, your business object will be changing here. It will be moving from worker to employee, but data will be same. The only thing is you will be not having option to link to other other business object. Let's say if you wanted to return benefit elections, okay, benefit elections cannot be linked to employee business object or job requisition. Okay, if you've been asked to return no job requisitions of worker, okay, you'll be not able to link your job requisition business object to your employee business object. Learning enrollment, if you've been asked to return all the learning enrollments of an employee, you'll be not able to link learning enrollments to employee, because worker is a kind of business object that will only link to any other business object in Workday, but employee will not be able to link to any other. Okay, so that is the reason why you actually choose the data source that is sitting under worker business object. Mostly 90% of reporting cases, you'll be actually choosing worker as a kind of primary business object. That data source you'll be choosing, but depends upon, it's not like you have to go in this way only. So it depends upon your thinking, how you wanted to build your report. Only the ideal objective of choosing this data source and business object is returning data how you wanted to have. That is the only thing that you need to make. So you can go with employee data source, which is sitting in which is sitting in employee business object. But still, if you wanted to choose your worker as a kind of primary business object. So it depends upon your hands-on and depends upon your understanding how you wanted to create reports. But yeah, the ideal, the concept is worker is a kind of super business object which can be linked to any other business object in Workday. And if you are actually choosing primary business object as worker, so you are open to link your worker to any other business object in Workday, whether it is learning, recruiting, performance, benefits, payroll, anything, any module. Your worker business object will be able to link to that particular business object in other modules and return the data in that respective category. So you can pick any of these business object that you wanted to return. Okay. All workers, you can select all workers, and if you wanted to filter with active, you can do that one. Or the mostly used data source in Workdays for worker related information, all active and terminated workers is the data source which is mostly used in Workday to play around with worker information. Okay, you can choose this data source, and if you wanted to filter for terminated, you can do that. If you wanted to filter for active, you can do that. You can do anything. Or if you wanted to go with all workers, if you wanted to return complete employee information in respect of their status, you can go with all workers. Okay. So all you'll be having contingent workers, you'll be having retirees, everything you'll be having in this data source. And this will be linked to any other business object. Okay. So if you're actually looking for if you're looking for the benefits, if you're looking for payroll, if you're looking for learning, anything can be associated with the worker business object. Any information that you wanted to link with worker, learning enrollment. So learning enrollment is nothing but employee will be enrolling into learning, right? So there is a way that you can link worker and
Hmm.
learning enrollment. But course is not related to employee, So if you wanted to return all the active courses, all the courses that are available in Workday, there is a different source for that one. Course is there, course name is there. There are different sources. Let's say So there are different data sources for course actually. You'll be selecting that particular data source to create report on course list of courses now. So this would be the ideal one that you wanted to go with courses, okay, which will return all the list of courses that are available in Workday. Okay, so there's another one courses which is sitting in learning courses business object. This also will work, okay, but this is indexed data source. So this would give a kind of conceptual understanding for you in creating reports, but so the more reports that you create will give practical understanding. Okay. So whatever I was explaining you is kind of very basic concept of reporting concept, but so when you implement this, when you create this one, when you get hands-on, that will be helpful for you in managing any reporting requirements that is on your way. So now we'll see different scenarios related to learning to create report. So these are all the data sources that are available in Workday for learning. Okay. If you wanted to report learning instructors, you'll be choosing that one. If you wanted to return enrollments, okay, you'll be choosing this one. But if you wanted to, go with worker and also do a kind of reporting on enrollments, the different thought that you can also think is have a worker as a kind of your primary business object. Sorry. So you can have your primary business object as a worker, and then you can add learning enrollment as a kind of related business object to your worker business object. Or you can also do other ways, have your report on learning. Right? Okay. So have your report on any of related learning business object. Let's say learning enrollments is there. Okay. Now so advanced is 99% of your reporting requirements will be an advanced. But if you wanted to have some graphical format, graphical, view of your report, you'll be choosing with matrix. If you wanted to return your data based on search criteria, you'll be choosing. If you wanted to have some kind of, interlink column and rows, you'll be choosing transports. That box is a kind of two-dimensional, which is mostly used in finance module. So it depends upon your requirements. Okay. The mostly used reporting is advanced, which can be returned data in a tabular format and can be associated with any integrations in Workday. Other reports cannot be linked with integrations. So that is the reason why mostly used report in Workday is advanced, which will be having advanced filtering options, advancing reporting methods, that you can play around with integrations also. Also, advanced report can be attached to integrations to pick the data and send to external system. So mostly used report is advanced. Okay. So now I've used learning enrollments as a kind of data source here. The primary business object that will be coming here is learning enrollment. Okay. So now if I wanted to make, if I
So
also wanted to have worker information here. Okay. So what I can do is I can just add worker as a kind of related business object. because worker can be linked to any other business object in Workday. I said, right? You have an option to link worker to your learning business. So now, what is your primary business object here? Your learning enrollment is a kind of primary business object, and worker is a kind of related business object, which is a kind of child table. Okay, so now you have linked. So in that way, you will be able to get worker in any of the business object, but you'll be not able to get any employee. You'll be not able to get other business objects that are associated with worker. Only worker is a kind of business object that will be pulled into any other business object. So just take a look in this area, and tomorrow, we'll be actually going into some examples of returning the data from Workday. Okay, so we'll be creating a few reports with some real-time scenarios. Even the data is not there, but we'll be going with worker. I think from worker we'll be having a lot of data in the system. We'll go in that scenario, and try to understand how reporting will work. Okay. So we'll be taking 3 to 4 examples of courses, enrollments, completion status, tracking enrollments, and also we'll be creating some instructors and see how we can report on them. All these things, we'll take 3 to 4 examples of learning area and probably create custom report in that scenario. When you're actually selecting that required learning category, what you'll do is, uh, the course that you're selecting. Okay, the courses that you're selecting, when you're actually creating campaign, you also have an option to select learning course. Okay, so that will be marked as a kind of required kind of content for employee when you're actually creating campaign. Yesterday we have selected a notification, but you also have an option to select learning course when you're actually sending campaign to employees. So based on that learning course thing, you'll be able to send a campaign. So we have seen different options there. You also have an option to select learning course when you're actually sending a campaign. So when you actually select this required learning content, this learning course will be a kind of a right choice that you wanted to send to employees as a kind of required learning content. So probably you can also do when you're actually creating campaign, if you are selecting a required learning category. Yesterday we have seen campaign type, campaign category, we have seen, right there. You'll be getting notifications, you'll be getting survey, you'll be getting learning course, multiple options you'll be getting. So learning course would be a kind of option for you. Learning course would be an option for you when you're actually choosing a learning category as required learning. We will be actually doing announcements respective to learning, respective to surveys, anything you can do. So that depends upon your requirement, but it's not like related to learning only. You need to put in your learning and should not be kept on landing page. It's not like that. You can actually announcement will not restrict in any area, so you can create that banner and have that announcement made on your landing page also.